The forest. A century ago, the forests of New England had almost nothing left standing. Farmland stretched where dense woodland once grew for thousands of years, and the region's ancient tree cover had been cut back to a small fraction of what it once was, a landscape reshaped almost entirely by human hands. Nobody planned what happened next. As farming shifted west toward richer soil and abandoned fields were simply left alone, the forest returned on its own terms, quietly, without funding campaigns, restoration programs, or headlines, one decade folding unnoticed into the next. Today, scientists studying the region's carbon absorption call it, without exaggeration, the greatest forest recovery in recorded history. Millions of acres of mature woodland now pull carbon from the air at a scale few engineered climate solutions could hope to match. Proof that sometimes the most powerful intervention available is simply stepping back and letting land do what it has always known how to do. This was a story of land recovering on its own, with no one directing it. The next one required deliberate, coordinated effort across an entire nation's power grid. The grid. Not long ago, keeping Britain's lights on meant burning coal and gas around the clock, regardless of the environmental cost, because renewable energy remained a promising but marginal contributor, vulnerable to every debate about cost, weather, and reliability that critics could raise against it. In the first quarter of 2026, that argument decisively lost. New data confirmed that renewables generated 53.1% of the United Kingdom's electricity, up sharply from the same period the year before, driven overwhelmingly by wind power, which alone supplied close to a third of the nation's total output, itself a 30% increase year on year. Total renewable generation reached 43.7 terawatt-hours, an 18% jump in a single year, achieved through a combination of new capacity and simply stronger winds. What was once framed as a distant aspiration is now, simply, how Britain keeps its lights on, from a nation's power grid to a disease that has haunted humanity for millennia. The vaccine. For generations, malaria killed with a predictability that made it almost invisible in the news cycle. Hundreds of thousands of deaths every year, most of them children under 5, treated by much of the world as an unavoidable fact of life in the regions hit hardest, rather than a solvable problem. Sir Adrian Hill spent decades trying to change that fact, shaped early in his career by time spent in the Gambia, where he saw firsthand what the disease did to communities with no real defense against it. Working at the University of Oxford, his team developed the R21/Matrix-M vaccine, achieving 75 to 80% protection in clinical trials, effective enough for the World Health Organization to formally recommend it, and cheap enough, at roughly £2.50 a dose, to reach the remote regions that need it most, remaining stable for up to 2 years without specialized refrigeration. Ghana approved it first, in 2023. Roughly 20 nations have followed since, preventing what researchers estimate to be tens of thousands of deaths already. This year, Hill was awarded the European Inventor Award for the work, recognition for a career built almost entirely in the places malaria hits hardest. Some victories happen in a laboratory over decades. Others happen in seconds, on the edge of a riverbank. The river. On the Yellowstone River in Montana, the current turned an ordinary summer afternoon into an emergency in a matter of seconds. A man was pulled under, swept downstream by water far stronger than it looked from the bank, with no rescue boat or trained responder close enough to reach him in time. On the bank stood a 14-year-old ranch kid, holding a rope he had practiced with for years, not for moments like this one, but for ordinary cattle work on his family's land, coiling and throwing it the same way, hundreds of times over, until it became second nature. Without hesitating, he threw the lasso exactly the way he always had. It caught, and a skill built for an entirely different purpose became the reason a stranger made it out of the water alive that afternoon. Not every rescue happens on a riverbank, in front of an audience. Some happen quietly, once a week, inside a hospital room. The NICU. Inside the neonatal intensive care unit at Children's Hospital of Richmond, the smallest patients often need something medicine alone cannot provide: steady, patient-human contact. At a stage of life when they are too fragile for almost anything else, doctors and machines can offer them. For 8 years, 73-year-old Dave Whitlow has shown up twice a week to give it to them anyway. No scrubs, no stethoscope, no medical training at all. Just his arms and the patience to sit with the hospital's most fragile fighters for as long as each one needs him. In a unit built around monitors, alarms, and machines, he has quietly become something none of that equipment can replace. And on a mountainside, a very different kind of devotion was being tested at the same time. The mountain. A hiking trail, a senior dog, and 100 pounds of exhausted muscle that simply could not walk any further. That was the situation 6 volunteer firefighters faced partway up a rugged, unforgiving mountain trail, far from any road. They had a choice: leave her behind and come back for her later, or carry her the rest of the way themselves. They chose to carry her. For 4.5 hours, across terrain never designed for the task, 6 men took turns shouldering her full weight, refusing to leave until she was safely back with the owner who had been waiting, increasingly panicked, at the trailhead below. No emergency protocol required it of them. They did it anyway, because leaving her wasn't a real option in their minds. And across an entire country, a slower, far quieter kind of recovery was reaching a milestone of its own. The woodlands. For most of modern Italian history, farmland dominated the landscape, and the country's forests survived mostly in memory, and in the mountains too steep and unforgiving for anyone to plow. That balance has now reversed for the first time since the Middle Ages. Italy's woodlands span 60,000 square miles, primarily across its mountain regions, officially surpassing the country's agricultural land for the first time in roughly 1,000 years. Researchers credit deliberate, sustained reforestation efforts, particularly in small mountain municipalities, that made restoring native woodland a civic priority rather than an afterthought left to chance. A landscape that took centuries of clearing to strip bare has quietly and without fanfare turned itself back around.